Hi, everybody. Paul Grand, CEO of Medtech Innovator. We're an accelerator for medical technology, specifically anything that's not biopharma. That's our space. We work with companies that tend to be a little more downstream. So, companies that generally have like at least a prototype and a team and those kinds of things. And we partner with a lot of strategics as part of what we do. We're trying to find the world's most compelling startups and then partner with the world's leading strategics. So that's what we do. And it was appropriate to, I guess, have me moderate a panel related to strategic investing. So it's going to be a great discussion. Let me give each of our panelists here a chance to introduce themselves. So why don't we start? We'll go this way. So Arnaud, you get to go first. Tell us about yourself.
Sure. Does it work? It works.
Yeah, that's on.
Hi everyone, my name is Arnaud Autret. I'm working at M Ventures as an investment director. Been joining M Ventures 3 years ago now. Previously, I was working at Venture Partners, which is a Paris-based VC firm, mainly investing in microbiome, medtech, and biotech. Background in immunology and virology. I've done my PhD at the Pasteur Institute in Paris, and then my postdoc at the Trinity College Dublin for a couple of years. I've been switching after that. Learning strategy finance in a business school in Paris. And after that, I've been working a couple of years at KPMG as a financial auditor for the healthcare business unit. And then I've been joining and starting my VC career. So it's very nice to be here today. So looking forward to discussing with you all. Thank you.
Great to have you here. Tamir.
Thanks, Paul. Hi, everybody. I'm Tamir. I'm part of the JGDC team here in California. I joined J&J about 8.5 years ago in Israel, started as an analyst and worked my way up to be an investor about 4.5 years ago. And 4.5 months ago, transitioned to our office in San Francisco, leading all our medtech investments strategically here on the West Coast and Australia. My background is biomedical engineering, physical chemistry. I'm also a paramedic by training, as well as an MBA, by the way. And yeah, pleasure being with all of you here.
Excellent. And Amy.
Hi, I'm Amy Beltramind. I am not as blonde as I was in that lovely finished picture. I am a co-founder and managing director of Convey Capital, which is a venture fund that we are currently raising with strategic investors into it. Previously, I was a managing director with Kaiser Permanente's venture capital fund. And then I've actually had yet a different strategic venture fund experience with Covidian, their venture fund on the medtech side, and then started my career in venture 15 years ago with a private fund, Advanced Technology Ventures. My career ahead of that was medtech with Guidant Corporation, and then health system consulting prior to that. So a little bit of a surround sound around the healthcare industry and the intersection with technology.
Excellent. So terrific panel, as you guys can see. I thought maybe we'd set the stage by just getting a sense for, how early you guys work with companies and get involved and want people to approach you at like what stage. So a lot of people here might be, faculty at UCLA or, people who are thinking about starting companies. So will you work with companies that are still, super early, like university stage? Like how early do you get involved? I'll start at the very end down there, Amy, with you.
Sure. For our current fund, it's really a Series A and B fund, so not seed stage, not sort of coming out of the university stage. But that is, different funds are different. So in my Covidian days, we actually were, at times, the first institutional money into a company. So, friends and family round type on occasion where it was really strategically impactful to the company was the kind of thing we would do. And then KP was, in between where it needed to be far enough along in order to be valuable to the organization because too early, they couldn't use something too early in the process. So it was a little bit later, probably more Series B type of investment. So again, early commercial traction or in the medtech universe, early clinical, moving on to, advanced clinical stage.
Okay. And Tamir?
Yeah. So normally, at least on the medtech side, I could say that we would be somewhat biased, quote unquote, to see early clinical similar to what Amy described. Maybe if this is not an implantable device, probably preclinical advanced would be somewhat of an acceptable perspective. Though with the advent of recent crazy valuations and crazy rounds, you're seeing 50 million, 70 million in Series A rounds. So a Series A is probably more similar to what Series B used to be, and vice versa. So on my table right now, I have a Series A company raising $30 million here in California. So. But historically, we've done company creations and we've done pipes, so we have the privilege of being somewhat, agnostic to stage in a sense. At least on the med device side, we're somewhat biased towards later stage. On the farm side, we've done company creation as well, even very recently. So I could sort of give examples from any stage of companies, but similar to what Amy said, we would be mostly focused on Series A and onwards, I'd say.
Okay, and Arnaud?
Yeah, so on our side, we invest in healthcare, life sciences, digital health. Usually, I mean, the scope is pretty broad, and we can invest at a pre-seed, seed, up to Series A, Series B. But also because we are an evergreen fund, we don't have any specific limitations, so we can support companies up to crossover round, even IPO. I would say our sweet spot would be Series A, but for example, we spin out of a company from UCLA in late 2020, Pictor Labs, and so it was a pre-seed seed stage. So that's something we can do very, very easily, and personally, that's a stage I really like as well, and trying to help entrepreneurs and recruiting the right people in the company. So it's pretty large, but we have definitely some flexibility there for sure.
And in terms of just timing, when you want people to approach you in the first place, it's one thing to write a check and be ready to do that. Are you open to having people talk to you guys when they're still in the concept stage? Like what's the right timing for somebody to reach out and just start a relationship? I'll start with you.
So I mean, on my side, I really like to have a look at the projects and companies quite early, especially because so that you can also help them a little bit, so that they will understand very quickly what they would need to do to become a proper opportunity of investment on our side. Usually, definitely, it's too early, so we used to help them and structuring a little bit the work for the next 6 or 12 months. And then potentially would be a bit more mature and will be able to move forward. So I would say as early as possible, so that we can also create kind of relationship between entrepreneurs and us, knowing each other a bit better. And also because, we will be able to check for strategic interest internally at Merck as well. So we would be, I think, as early as possible and keeping the contact and the relationship for sure.
Tamir?
Yeah, so I think maybe preaching to the choir here a bit, at an academic stage when there's no even business perspective, I'd say it's probably a bit too early to reach out to a corporate, and I think you would agree as well, and same for you, Amy. I think my philosophy generally, regardless of J&J, is I'd rather know about something when it's too early rather than when it's too late and it's in the hands of somebody else, right? So I similar to Arnaud, I would encourage entrepreneurs and inventors to reach out, get some feedback from us on what we would like to see in order for us to invest, whether it's a stage perspective, whether it's a technology perspective. I'm a big believer of ongoing communications and keeping a connection sort of valid and alive up until the right moment arrives. And this could be a 1, 2, 3 year play, but there are other deals and other things that keep us sort of entertained. So I would second Arnaud and say as early as you think is reasonable is good enough for us to keep the connection.
Okay.
Yeah, I think the one thing is we too early versus too late. I like that as a framework. We do a lot of thesis-driven work, and so we're often scanning an entire landscape of what are all the different solutions around a particular investment area or problem. And so we like to see what the up-and-coming things are. So if we're going to make a bet, we don't make a bet just to be overwhelmed by something that's much better coming down the pike. So there is a sort of market scan that is very helpful to see what's coming, so we don't make a bet and then regret it. But we probably also won't spend a lot of time early in the process. It's sort of a relationship development, a get to know sort of what the kernel of your advantages and your timeline. And so I would say don't expect a ton of time if it's not the right stage for the investor. But you're really sort of setting up for when it is.
Okay, so short question here, but the short question is, someone calls you and says, "Hey, I got this technology, and I'll send you my NDA." Do you sign an NDA right away?
So that has varied incredibly depending on the different firms I've been with. For private firms, we tend not to. For big corporates, so KP would be an example, Covidien we want to. And so in some ways, it's a protection of the broader organization and their IP to actually have those non-disclosures. Now, keep in mind, you will use the non-disclosure agreement from the corporate, the big fish, because trying to get through a legal change on that end is inordinate and will sort of subsume your entire investing timeline. So I would highly recommend, you might, negotiate if there are particular things within that structure to negotiate, but typically speaking, you're going to want to, just accept the fact that you're going to go with the big corporates or institutions NDA.
But you said private, though you wouldn't. Like, so your new fund that you're
yeah,
setting up.
You tend to try to keep it minimal because you're sort of creating this whole legal web of yourself, and you don't have anything internal to protect.
Right. So in your case, you'd probably say keep it non-confidential initially.
Yeah, I would think, and typically the first conversation, you're not going to do an NDA. Like it's it's too much to get the lawyers involved before you even know there's a there. I would say that, provide the things that you would be happy to share publicly. And that's usually enough for that first indication.
Yeah. Same for you, Tamir?
I'd maybe want to sort of differentiate between the cases where there is an already ongoing conversation and the company wants to expose additional material. I think that's fine. And I would second Amy's approach of signing a corporate NDA because they're kind of standard most of the time and fairly broad to the extent that it's easy to review and agree to most of the terms. Whereas I just this morning got a request, not from somebody in this audience, God forbid, but somebody sent me an email, "Hey, we're doing this and that. Here's our NDA, sign it, and then we'll share materials." I'm like, not going to happen. So be very mindful of our times, because I don't know about you guys. I'm assuming you're getting the same amount of deal flow. If this is the approach I'm getting, I'm not going to spend any minute of my time on this. So I guess feel free to share something that's non-confidential first, and if the discussion develops from there and there's strategic interest from the business, sure, we can sign an NDA. That's fairly easy to do.
Yeah, I can definitely confirm. Sometimes we have companies reaching out to us saying, yeah, absolutely, please sign the NDA. We'll be able to share a couple of information. It's definitely a no-go. It doesn't, indicate great, I would say also behavior from the management of the company. So the idea is really to start as a non-confidential discussion. And obviously, as soon as we want to move forward, we'll sign an NDA. On the MVentures side, things can go a bit definitely quicker because we are MVentures definitely separated from the business. So we have our own NDA. So things can be quick, but even in that case, that's not why we will potentially sign an NDA with every single company we can receive and we have in the deal flow. Would be just impossible. So the idea is really just to keep those signatures when things are ready for us to move forward, at least at the next step. And also for the company, it's also way better. So yeah.
Well, let's get to the why for a second here. Like, why are you even, at the corporate level, why are you even investing in early companies? Is that, is it because they align with your strategy? You try and do things that are outside your core strategy? Like, what's the philosophy? I'll start with Tamir on this.
Yeah. So I think the fact is, when it's early stage, and we invest to sort of acquire, in a sense, to onboard, right? So that's really the entire purpose of what we do in investments. So for us, it's a good opportunity to influence the company from the inside, whether it's from the board perspective of even just bringing additional know-how and support from the organization to help build that company to something that we will end up acquiring, whether it's one product of their pipeline or it's the entire company. Because at the end of the day, once you sort of provide the check to acquire the company, that's when the real hard work starts. Integration is not an easy thing for any big corporate, right? So as long as you build this business from the sort of ground up to be something that J&J or any other company would acquire, I think that's why we would invest early. I think otherwise it's sort of a, risk-benefit perspective, right? The earlier you invest, the likelihood of a higher price is lower. So,
yeah, Arnaud, same thing.
Yeah, absolutely. I think at least on our side, on the MVentures side, we will be focusing on specific, more kind of early stage companies where the technology is not ready, especially for BD or even M&A for sure. So to give you an example, when we invest in the company, we know that BD will be interested in those kind of technologies in 5 or 10 years potentially. So the idea is really just to invest early, to have a look at what will be the next big trends, what we think the business should not miss, in the future. So I think it's really important. Again, the idea is really just to really be separated from the business, so that we of course we invest. Our investments are strategic, but we are also very much financially driven in our choices when we invest in companies. So, which is, I think, really important to make the right choices for sure.
And financially driven, that's interesting too, because sometimes I know not all strategic investments are financially driven, right? I mean, some might be just strategy. Amy, you've got 3 for the price of 1. You can give us the Covidian, the Kaiser Permanente, and your new fund. As to the why.
Yeah, and I would say that there is an important distinction between sort of the Covidian experience, which was, invest to buy. I mean, that was sort of you're putting feelers out there about what's coming up, either within the core of your business or adjacent to it, new vectors of growth. On the Kaiser side, it's a lot more about what's coming next in terms of, new technology that could influence your business model or enable you to be more efficient in your business model, enable you to provide healthcare better, different, et cetera. And so it's more as a customer and keeping your eyes on the things. And I think, Lisa, pointed out well that, that takes a lot of doing to get some, particularly sort of the digital component and implementation off the ground. And so actually having sort of advanced warning of what is emerging from high growth companies is really what, the executives wanted their eyes on. So it becomes sort of an advanced team. And then, getting ready to be, as a customer, what technologies, what services, et cetera, are available to us versus doing things the way that we had been doing it. And then I would say that Convey is we're actually a step before some of those strategic funds that may be tied right to the business, because what they struggle with is actually scanning the landscape of early companies. And so before they're ready to commit, they can potentially get eyes on those trends and to say, where do we want to double down if they don't have an advanced, venture program internally, but they want to invest. We can give them those eyes on those landscapes, which is why we do a lot of sort of thematic type investing to say, hey, these are the areas. And then we can invest in those A and Bs, and they might be ready for the C, where they could really drive a partnership at that point.
So thematics, let's talk about that for a minute. So like what kinds of things are interesting to you? I mean, I know it's not all, healthcare the way we might traditionally think of it. Like even Kaiser Permanente did the investment in the food as medicine company. I can't remember the name off the top of my head. The one
Farms.
Yeah, exactly. So like what kinds of things are you investing in thematically?
Yeah, I mean, I would say that, from a thematic perspective, it's sort of top down, bottom up. So top down is where are the areas of greatest need within the organization. And, one, that Lisa brought up that has now been very overly invested in at this point is mental and behavioral health. But we invested in that, 7 years ago with Ginger. And so seeing the writing on the wall of like, hey, there is much more demand than there is supply. Is there a different way to solve that mismatch than, throwing people at it? I think there are other areas where just historically been underinvested in, which is things like women's health, where there just hasn't been a change in paradigm that now actually with sort of digital technology and new advancements in medical technology, there's new opportunity to move the needle. So, we did a big dive into that. And then precision medicine is another example, and it actually hits along a lot of different modalities. So it's not just, oh, it's medtech, or no, it's just digital health, or no, it's just services, but how do you actually bring, more personalized medicine to the table? And so it's those kinds of themes. And it's interesting because we're seeing a lot of convergence across different ways of solving these issues. But the sort of core need is, can you better match the therapy and the diagnosis to the person?
Yeah. And Tamir?
Yes, I mean, being a strategic investor, it has to tie into all of our existing franchises. So if you're looking at our surgical vision, Ethicon, Depew Synthes, and CSS, this would have to tie into our existing portfolio of products. Now, in terms of thematics, we would mostly look at disruptive technologies. So I'd say not incremental, even though we would have the occasional incremental technologies. And in recent years, we've obviously trying to look at the advent of robotics as, a bigger play for us with the Oris acquisition and the Verb acquisition, and some of my other pipeline projects right now are in robotics. So this is sort of a very exciting space, especially when, for example, in orthopedics, you're seeing robots for each one for a different indication. So there's one for spine, one for knee. So it's never going to be just one system in a sense. So these are sort of the areas we're looking at, but also adjacencies in the form of digital health and sensors and analytics and data science, etc.
Arnaud?
Yes, on our side, I mean, we have two specific funds: a tech fund, a biotech fund. On the biotech side, would be really focusing on healthcare, like oncology, fertility, or autoimmune diseases. On the life science side, we'll be focusing more on bioprocessing, AI drug discovery, screening and monitoring, digital lab, connected lab, being able to analyze and to aggregate data from those labs is becoming much more important. Very interested in spatial biology, single cell, etc. On the tech side, so we have electronic fund when they will be focusing on quantum computing, for example, with the ability to invest as well on quantum sensors for diagnostic solutions, business, etc. So we have some transversal. Yeah, it's really transversal between the funds, and we also have a, let's say, New Frontiers Sustainability Fund where they have been investing as well in digital health. I mean, we've been investing in the company Akili, for instance, which is dealing with a specific prescription treatment delivered by through video game for children having ADHD. It has been FDA approved. So it's pretty broad, and the idea is really just trying also to build some transversal work between the teams, so we can really have a deep look into that. So. In the past, we had a life science fund and a healthcare fund, and to be honest, we merged the two of them because we have seen a couple of life science companies moving very, towards healthcare because they were based on specific platform, etc. So yeah, we try to keep our flexibility and to focus on the right strategy for the business.
That's great. And you guys have all mentioned digital, I think, in the conversation. So you are investing in digital health. Digital health, Tamir, I think you were the one who mentioned valuations, being incredibly high and all that. So just is it a bubble? Or is digital health the future? Is it, meaning, like, obviously it's not. I don't think it's going away, but is it just going to become health and everything is digital at this point? Like, where are we going with this?
Well, I don't want to be very blunt, to be honest, being the Israeli.
Yes, you do.
Being the Israeli on the panel.
No one's listening. It's just us.
Well, I have my own opinion on valuations, and it's just not just in digital health, but I don't want to say we're in a bubble, but we're sort of reminiscent of bubble science, let's put it that way, in a politically correct term. I mean, it's definitely here to stay, and I think COVID was a big push for that perspective. Will that completely replace regular medicine and physician visits? Probably not 100%, but it would definitely minimize and enable access to a lot of areas that previously were not able to access these. I would maybe sort of, for my other panel members here, correspond this to board meetings, right? We would normally go to board meetings every quarter, face to face, whether it was in Europe or US or Israel. And nowadays it's all by Zoom, and maybe you do 1 or 2 times a year face to face. So that would certainly reduce the load on the system in very certain aspects. I'm not sure it's going to replace a lot of things. For example, you can't replace surgery doing digitally. I think mental health may have some benefit from moving things to virtual. Maybe even digestive health or chronic conditions that require ongoing treatment, but not necessarily a physical treatment per se. But I think it really would have to correspond to a very clear clinical value for a VC or a corporate for them to invest, whether it's to an existing service, procedure, product we're selling, but not necessarily as an independent product outside of our portfolio of products.
Amy?
Yeah, I mean, I would say that we're in the early innings of digitization and what it means for the delivery of healthcare and treatment and diagnosis. And so valuations are in the late innings. And so it's been a little bit of a mismatch because the valuations have just been ahead of the risks that still need to be retired and the work that still needs to be done in order to, weave in a whole sort of new way of doing some of these things and integrate the in-person versus the virtual, be able to integrate, what digital tools can you add into the process that actually makes it more efficient and generates a value proposition. And so, it's a little bit going to be fits and starts in that sense. And in a lot of ways, having all the capital come in is a good thing because it actually pushes the process along. But there'll be dislocation because there will be sort of M&A in platforms and other things. I know from my KP experience that it's really difficult for a large organization to interact with a small organization. And so the bigger the platform and the more things that one platform could enable and provide makes it much easier from an implementation perspective to actually do those things. And so all of that will evolve over time. But I do think there's a tremendous amount of opportunity to really, be able to bring, more access, more affordability, but it's not a straight line. Early stage companies and venture investing, it's never a straight line. And we're going to see a lot of changes in movement, et cetera. So it's really about, can you find something that shows, a lot of value, and it may be a lot of value on its own. It may be a lot of value as incorporated into another company, or it's a lot of value incorporated into, another organization. But I think there's still a ton to be both done, but also a ton to be accomplished.
I want to move on to another topic. Is that all right? So let's talk about why you'd want to have a strategic in the first place, maybe in your company, like what that means as an investor to have a strategic. I know in the older days, which I'm talking like 5-7 years ago, in the older days, I remember a lot of us used to be afraid to bring a strategic into the company, and we go, "Oh, it's too early to have a strategic," or "What does that signal to have a strategic?" So let's talk about that for a little bit. Like, what does that mean to have a strategic on your cap table? And I guess is it a danger? Like, are you going to steal everyone's ideas and go run with it? Like, what is that? How is that? Is there a firewall between the investor side and the development side? Like, just give us a little bit of a flavor for that. So I'm gonna start at the end and then work my way back again. Amy, you got lots of stories to tell, I'm sure. So tell us about that.
Yeah. It's interesting. Like, also back in the olden days, which wasn't that long ago, and actually my first, my Covidian role was my first strategic role, and actually at that time, so that would have been 2010. It was very much this, those, the strategics, except for JDDC, you guys were a lot of standalone on the medtech side. It was, you come in just at the very end, right before a company is thinking about going public. And that's, the time and only the time that the medtechs come in, because we don't want them to steal the idea. We don't want to, share too much. We don't want others to think that medtech is going to buy the company. So ignore them. And so it closes down your M&A option. So it was a lot of that. But that was also right, that started to change with the financial crisis. I mean, there was almost out of total necessity for capital that people were willing to take the risk that, hey, people are going to look at this, sideways, because you really needed those medtechs to come in and lead rounds, not just follow or not just price the last round. And then I think that, was a sort of a wholesale shift that started to happen at that point. And I think a lot of times the different investors started to take a more neutral stance in their investing. So clean term sheets, not a lot of rights, because that I think is also a difference. It's not just, hey, are you on the cap table, but do you have any special rights to acquire? Do you have any right of first refusal, an option to buy, those kinds of things? Because those are different than, hey, I'm just investing because I want to sort of participate alongside on the board, and maybe at a time when it's right, acquire, or let go because someone else wants to. So I think that, has changed a bit, A, out of necessity, and A, I think there's a bit of an evolution in terms of the broader ecosystem. KP is a whole different animal because we're a customer. So it looks good if you're on the cap table. It looks a little awkward if we're not actually a customer of the product. So it's a little bit of a double-edged sword, but overall, I think it's usually seen as good if, hey, this is a big potential customer and they're investing, so that, it cleared some hurdle of diligence within that organization.
And Tamir, I'll head to you.
Yeah, so I'll second a lot of what Amy said, and different industries obviously have different characteristics. So if you're looking at the payer, insurer, health system, that's a different story than a med tech player, and certainly different than a pharma player, where the market dynamics really dictate what having a strategic investor on your cap table means. At least on the med tech side, there are not many acquirers nowadays. So if there is a potential acquirer that, for example, had a right of first refusal and ended up not triggering it, it's not a good sign, whether it's because of strategic reasons that have nothing to do with the product or the company, or whether if it's the company and the product, right? It sort of is, as you said, a double-edged sword in a sense. I'd say in terms of, you mentioned sort of stealing ideas, and that somewhat corresponds with the NDA discussion we've had earlier. I think the corporates are a bit more afraid of confidentiality and IP issues than the company is. We don't want to get into those claims. We don't want to get into litigation because it tends to be long, and it's brutal at the end of the day. So as Amy mentioned, our structure is that we are effectively firewalled from the operating companies within J&J. And at least the way I think the modus operandi is good is that we encourage the portfolio company to connect directly with the operating company, with us not being involved at any certain point unless we're asked to, and that has to be explicitly mentioned. And same goes vice versa. We don't share anything from the opco to the portfolio company. And I think that's a really good mechanism to somewhat protect the corporate and the company as well. And at the end of the day, we serve at the behest of the company as directors. We have our fiduciary duties to those companies as directors, so we need to protect those as well. And that is eventually our reputation as investors as well.
And how about at M Ventures?
Yeah, so on our side, we definitely have a clear firewall between M Ventures and the mother company. It's absolutely key. The same thing. I mean, the mother company has no specific right on the portfolio companies, no right of first refusal or anything. That's also why we always syndicate. This will never do any deal alone, and that's because we don't have those attachment between the portfolio company and the mother company. We can also syndicate with other corporate investors, financial investors. Also, I think having a strategic on the cap table, allowed the company as well to bring followers investment, for example, and new investors, just because we know that when we invest in the company, due diligences are very, very deep on the tech side, on the IP side, on the market side. So that's also why sometimes we take a bit more time, to analyze specific opportunity. But as soon as we are in, we can usually bring new investors with us to build the syndication. Thinking about, of course, we are always very happy to make any introduction between the portfolio companies and the business. In case that's a win-win situation. But in that case, and because we usually are active investors, we're having board and observer position, if that happens, we'll just step back from the board during those discussions and really keeping the firewall policy at the best. So it's really important for sure.
Amy, I just gotta follow up on something you said before. So I'm just curious, how do you explain when KP was not a customer, but you're investing in the company? How do you answer that?
Yeah, usually, KP is huge, and so it is there's always therefore the potential to be a customer. It's just sometimes an organization has to be big enough for it to make sense mutually.
More timing than
it's more of a timing versus like, hey, it gets real awkward if we pick something else of similar size. Like that is the more awkward scenario. It doesn't happen a lot, I have to say. And actually, KP probably had some form of relationship from pilot or to national program with probably 2/3 of the available portfolio. So there was actually synergy, even though we very explicitly never tied an investment to a commercial relationship, because we never wanted to even have the perception that our investment impacted the commercial relationship. That was, the clinical commercial side always reigned supreme in that. And so we were not influencing that, but we were drawing from that same insight. But, as a big organization, and like I said before, in terms of it's hard for big organizations to work with small companies, that, if something's too early, it's tough to be a customer, but it's good that, hey, this is a group that says, hey, these guys are on the right track. There's a lot of promise. They're solving an important need. And that when they get to the right size, we would be interested in engaging at that point, or when they prove the certain thing. So like clinical data, clinical experience, ROI, then that's the right time to engage.
All right. I have one last thing before we get to Q&A that I kind of want to cover, which is a combination of more like tips for people who are out there in the audience. So what are, what gets your attention? How does somebody get your attention? Is it just like sending you a LinkedIn message, or like, what makes you get kind of like interested in something? And what are good questions for people to ask you maybe in the process? So we'll start with that, and then maybe we'll end with red flags. So why don't we start off with, what are some things that get your attention? Like how does somebody, Arnaud, if someone wants to, get a response from you, like how do they do that?
So I think one of the first thing would be for the company and the management to really understand where we want to invest. Definitely, I mean, they would understand potentially if that's really, really out of scope. So there is no need for them to
do their homework, do their research.
Exactly. I mean, it's quite obvious on the website. As well, in addition to that, I think if they can very short summary when they reach out to us with a couple of sentences on the technology, on the competition, the gap on the market. It's really important to have this vision very quickly when we have a look at the new company. I think it would be a good.
Should they send you a deck immediately, a presentation?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean,
that's
it's
fine.
definitely possible. I mean, a couple of companies, they can definitely reach out to us sending a non-confidential deck. Sometimes it's very, very limited in terms of information. So potentially, if we think could be of interest strategically, we'll reach out to the company asking for a bit more for details. But yeah, that's something you can do definitely. So that we'll be able to work with the team and to come back to the management very quickly in a couple of days. So they will know if we want to have an intro call or it's just really out of scope on our side. So it's really important so that they will not waste that time as well, and things can move very quickly.
Okay, and Tamir?
I'll maybe look at it from a different angle and say what not to do rather than what.
That'd be great, please.
I mean, J&J, and similar to you or no, we're all big organizations and there are so many stakeholders, and it's sort of I don't want to say bad practice, but it really is in a sense. I'm seeing a lot of people reach out to multiple stakeholders in the organization at any given time, and it gets not just frustrating, but very confusing for the organization. And they do not disclose who they are in contact with.
Multiple stakeholders within the same organization, right?
So I would hear about something, and then he would say, "No, but I spoke to your colleague in France, and he said it would be interesting." And that colleague is from a different sector. He has no idea what MedTech wants. And he already spoke to 3 other colleagues in the US he knows from his previous role, and you just start creating a mess within the organization. So it doesn't add to your reputation for sure. I would start with that. I would also say don't try and do my job for me, in a sense. There's a very fine line between trying to make my job easier than trying to do my job for me. I've had a recent individual reach out to me telling me, this specific deal will be the deal of my life that I have to say yes to, even though it's an area J&J is not even going to be active in, for sure. So I think there's a very fine line between the two. So make sure that you're knowing, what the right way to approach it. But second, or no, in the sense that, send a non-confidential deck, give us a background, say why you think it fits J&J, do your homework. If we've done an acquisition in that space, if we've done an investment in that space, how that complements our portfolio, how that helps our portfolio sell better, be better, etc.
I think another thing to think about is also how we tend to triage things. And a lot of times we triage things based on team and connections you have to somebody else we know. And so it's sort of an annoying aspect of it, because you definitely get fast-tracked if you get introduced by somebody else we know, because we know that someone's done some amount of filtering to say, hey, pay attention to this, because they already they already know what we're interested in, what we're looking for, or share who is on your team. And it could be in your non-confidential deck, and it could be your advisors, your team, your background, because we're also looking for, why is this person going to be able to, really break through something disruptive? And so my eyes immediately go to that. And so really bring that forward when you're first reaching out, because I think that is sort of the thing that tends to catch, my eye. And it's pretty, sort of the adage for real estate is location, location, location. The adage for venture capital is team, team, team. So it's really true. And so be sure to highlight that. And then in terms of the questions to ask us, there's their homework component, but then there's also the asking, like, what stage do you invest? Do you lead investments? What size of an investment? Are you following on the investment? Meaning you're not pricing the round. What stages are comfortable? What areas are targeted? Because that quickly gets you down to, is this the right investor match? Because we don't want to waste your time. You don't want to waste our time. It's one of those things where so no one has time. And so those are actually quickly things that you can get to that then, enables you to have that productive conversation. And then you can always end with, hey, if you're not the right fit, because from an investor profile, do you know other funds that are? And that way you can sort of quickly get to that introduction that I just talked about. Because if, we're interested, but it's just not the right fit, or we're impressed with the team, but it's just not, the area that our organizations are focused on, we may know another group that, we then can connect you into. And I think that's just a really productive question to ask, because they might say, hey, let me think about it. And you might never hear from them again. Bad practice, but it happens all the time. But you might actually get that moment of getting passed on to the next opportunity. And that can often then lead to that initial dollars that then allows you to continue to risk mitigate going forward.
And last question, then we'll do Q&A. So Tamir, you already started with like what not to do. So let me just ask a couple more of those real quick. So start at the end and work back this way. Any other red flags? Any other things that just please don't do that, guys. This is bad practice. Anything else?
Well, yeah. So the one that sticks to my mind, and there is this fine line between pleasantly persistent and harassment. I have people in my head.
That's a general lesson in life.
It's a general lesson in life, but it's true, and it's tough. It's tough to find your place because, again, the nature of the business is bizarre. The pattern. I remember bringing on new associates and having them be like, "What? How do I organize my time?" Because you could be working on something, then something else comes in and trumps it all, and it sort of throws everything off. And so you will lose attention from venture capitalists and then regain it and lose it. But you've got to be able to follow up in a cadence that brings it back to the fore without, being the stalker. And I think that's the one that if you do it too regularly, you get sort of on the do not answer the phone list. But if you don't do it enough, you could actually lose an opportunity that might actually have evolved. So I would say that it's nuanced and it's troubling, but know that the stalker one isn't going to work for you.
That's definitely a good one. I know from my experience in talking to lots of people too, it's don't call the CEO of the organization. Don't call and say, hey, this is a great opportunity. And then, that gets passed down to you. That's not going to motivate you, right? If the CEO, so don't call your CEO, don't call the CEO of the medtech company. And any other, Tamir, last chance for you.
I have a horror story to share. I'm not sharing names, but location for sure. And I have Amir here, so he could vouch for that happening in Israel quite a lot. So we've had an Israeli group reach out to Alex Gorsky, CEO of J&J, through our New York consulate of Israel. It got to Alex, then it got to BD, and then it got to us back in Israel, instead of them just reaching out to us. And you can imagine what reputation they have at this point when our contact details are well known in the industry and they're basically publicized everywhere. So I would say just find the right contact, probably, instead of going through the entire chain.
Yeah, definitely. Arnaud?
Yes, something that can happen sometimes is definitely when you receive a document and you clearly see that they highlight the fact that there is no competition at all. And then you're like, okay, so if you don't have any competition, you maybe don't have any market. So the idea is it's better for the company to highlight the competitors, but definitely very quickly in the discussion to also highlight why they are better, what are the differentiation and differences, and why they think they will be accepted by the market, quickly and etc. I think the management does not have to avoid the confrontation and talking about what is existing on the market, because at least my side personally, when I see we don't have really any competitors, or first of all, it can be true, but I'm worried about the market, and usually it's not the case. To give you an example, we have been investing in Picto. So Picto is doing digital staining. Of course, potentially they don't have any competitors on the digital staining side, but you still have the chemical one. So this is your competitor. So I think it's really important to really have a very good understanding of where you are with your technology very quickly. Of course, can need some flexibility, can evolve and change, but I think that's something for me. It's can be definitely a no-go.
Paul, I have one more.
Yes, give us the last one, and then we'll go to Q&A. Yes.
Just the timing of when you expect to have term sheets in the round, particularly on the corporate side. There's going to be a diligence process, and it's going to take time. So don't approach and say, hey, we've got 2 weeks and then we want to close. And then B, usually if you're just starting your diligence process, it's not going to be that fast. And so you're sort of showing a level of sort of naivete that is off-putting. So give the corporates enough time to go through their process, and don't oversell. You got to create urgency so that that part of the selling process makes sense, but don't make it too short. Because what will happen is people will say, I can't actually get the diligence done in that time frame. I'm not even going to engage. And so it's just sort of create the sense of urgency without over pushing your timeline, so that people actually engage in the process and you can get them through the process they need to go through. And you can even ask that question, like, hey, what's your typical process time to go through diligence, et cetera. And so again, I don't want people to get shut out of opportunities because they've sort of oversold. Hey, I'm going to get term sheets in 4 weeks, because if you're going to get term sheets in 4 weeks, I probably can't engage sufficiently in order to participate. So I'm not going to engage at all.
All right, let me give some time we have 5 minutes, Dina says, for Q&A. Who wants to ask any questions? And if not, I have more questions. Anyone want to ask questions? There's a mic up here in the middle. Come on over, line on up.
Hello, great discussion. Thank you very much. I'm interested in knowing, you just touched upon this here and there, but I'm interested in knowing for the companies, potential portfolio companies approaching, how important for them to have engaged in some customer discovery, know about the market. Arnaud said that it's important that they know about the market cap, and but if a company approaches and they don't have any idea about the customer or any touch to the market, but the technology seems great, how do you approach those companies commercially? If there's another company that's engaged in customer discovery, knows about the potential market fit. So just the technology or the market insights, how do you rate that?
Yeah, no, absolutely. No, that's a great question, because especially, on our side, on the biotech side, life science, there's definitely those kind of tools and technologies that we'll have to reach the market and to find customers and users. So I think usually when the company and the technology is quite early, it's not done. It's very difficult to be able to analyze that, but very quickly. On our side, we'll be able to work with a couple of people internally at Merck, where on the commercial side, so they know what are the gaps on the market. They know what users want and need, and that's something we can also elaborate and work with those kind of technologies and new companies to help. On my side, I have portfolio company, and they've been reaching out to definitely maybe 50 or 100 kind of potential users in the future, KOL, so that you understand really what they want, what they need, and so that you can also design your product, and you can design your technology for reaching out to those customers very quickly. I think it's really important, and you will learn a lot. I think it's something which is also very, very absolutely key.
Yeah, super important.
I think it really depends on sort of stage and expectations really on the other side. So, if it's a sort of a incubator seed stage company, you're not expecting everything to be mature and well thought out of. One part of our role as board members and as investors is to complement that, whether it's from the organization like we do as corporate investors, but also sometimes bring in the right people into the company. So, for example, in one of my portfolio companies in Berlin, we brought in a US CEO who has very vast knowledge and commercialization of digital assets in the US. So it's part of your role as an investor, I think, to recognize what is realistic to be had when you're investing in the company and what can be built out through time after the investment.
Let's. You have a question? Go ahead.
In terms of fundraising and going public, is it ever too late to look for strategic investors?
I mean, it really depends on sort of the strategic investor's strategy in terms of when they invest. But no, I mean, typically the strategic investors were actually showing up late in the game. And so we've just more recently gone earlier and earlier. So now you got a lot of strategic investors that are pretty stage agnostic. Now, when I think about some of the medtech experiences, right before IPO as just a precursor into IPO, we suddenly then lose all our board seats. So there isn't a lot of strategic value if that window is really short versus, hey, this is the mezzanine round, but it sort of gives us an opportunity to potentially acquire it before it goes public. That's an interesting time horizon. So it's just a little bit of a nuance in terms of being too late. If you're too close to an IPO, there isn't any strategic value.
All right, one last question. Yes.
Could you talk a little bit about pursuing joint development agreements and when it is appropriate to start to raise your profile, if that's what your goal is? What's too early or to be able to engage those people? Any advice you have there would be great.
So, that's again a great question. I would say, especially when a specific company would like you to be in touch with the business, the business will have a look at the company once, and then you will have 1-2 years to be able to provide an update. So I would say to be ready for those kind of discussion, so that you will not miss I would say the train, because they as soon as they have the pipeline of specific companies they want to have a look at, I mean, when it's done, and they will wait a couple of months before for you to be able to reach out again. So to the company. So I think it's important to be ready, and or potentially even to trying to get a bit some information on the stage to see if really could be a good fit, and if that's okay, to definitely move forward with that.
Thank you guys for a terrific panel. That was really
Thank you,
great.
Paul.
Yeah.